Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin in the spring of 2020. Every week, we bring you another cutting-edge webinar on issues of interest to mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and anybody who negotiates for a living or for a hobby. And today, we're very happy to have Tal Lifshitz with us, talking about crypto litigation. It's a fascinating subject, and Tal is just the one to speak about it. He's a partner in Koziak, Tropin, and Throckmorton in Miami, Florida. He's in their complex litigation department and co-chair of the firm's cryptocurrency, digital asset, and blockchain group. Tal is an experienced litigator, former federal judicial law clerk with federal jury trial experience. He's part of a team that handles bet the company cases and class actions. He represents a wide range of sophisticated corporate and individual clients, including investors in high-stakes business disputes, investment and securities frauds, and Ponzi scheme litigation. Before we get to Tal's presentation, one of the best parts of the program every week is when we talk about the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed to food banks in honor of our wonderful speakers. So turn it over to Jean, I believe, for the report on how much our generous audiences have contributed to date.
Well, actually, I'm going to delegate. It's Sare who's going to do it today.
Oh, great.
Yeah, live from Canada.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. So this week's total is $276,398.60.
That is amazing.
Right.
Our audiences have been so generous, and our speakers have been so tremendous in terms of these excellent presentations, inspiring people to contribute to fight food insecurity. Now to the presentation. Here's what Tal's going to be talking about. There are a lot of lawyers who promote themselves as crypto lawyers, and that includes litigation. But while the regulatory, transactional, compliance, and related non-litigation aspects of crypto lawyering are discussed and analyzed extensively, which makes good sense for a developing technology, the litigation side of the crypto world warrants attention too. This presentation will provide a broad overview of crypto litigation, including what it actually is, and perhaps more importantly, what it soon could be. So, Tal Lifshitz from Miami, Florida, we're delighted to have you here. Please tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you'd like people to contribute if they're able, and then on with the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for that introduction, and congratulations again, and kudos for the great work that you've all been able to do. It's really, really amazing and impressive, and should be very proud of yourselves. I'm very excited about being here with all of you today, not just because I like talking about Bitcoin and crypto and all things related. I certainly do, but because I also get to call it my work for at least a couple of hours today, and I'll give a little bit of background as I go through my presentation about how I got to what I do, what it is I do. But I'm also going to be mindful of the fact that, I'm going to talk for maybe 30 minutes. I could talk for 3 hours or 3 weeks about these issues and really only kind of scratch the surface. It's not just one discrete area of law. As you'll see at the end of the presentation, it's 5 or 6 or maybe a dozen different areas of law that intersect into what can be considered crypto litigation. I've put my contact information into the chat. That's my email address and my link to my LinkedIn profile. I would love to connect with all of you and continue this conversation beyond just today. And I have a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see how smoothly this goes. If I can have permission from the host, and then I'll also talk briefly about Camillus House. Thank you. Okay, so You all should be looking at my LinkedIn profile. Is that what you can see? Well, I'll talk briefly about Camillus House, which is not just a food bank, but if any of you are familiar with it, it's an organization that focuses on the homelessness issue in Miami-Dade, in our South Florida community, which is a real problem. It's an organization that a couple of my partners are very actively involved in and that I support in any chance that I get. It's not just a food bank. It's also assistance with housing, treatment for drug or other substance abuse issues, and other services that community needs. But it's really meaningful and important to me. And I really appreciate as part of this that if I can give just a little bit of attention to it for all of you. Okay, a primer on crypto litigation. You're all with me?
We're all with you.
All right. So I remember when I was a law student and then a baby lawyer, and having conversations with these senior partners at these big respected law firms. And I would ask them what they do, as one does. And the response was always something, really, really verbose. I do complex commercial litigation and business disputes and class actions and mass torts, and I represent all kinds of, and on it went. And I would, stand there and I would nod my head and I would pretend like I knew what that meant. Now, years have gone by and I have a much better understanding of what complex commercial litigation means. And I know enough to know that when somebody says that, that can mean many, many, many different things. So it occurs to me now that when I talk to people and I say that part of my practice involves crypto litigation, and they nod their heads and they suggest to me that they know what I'm talking about, that there is at least a chance that they really don't, because I know enough to at least know that that could mean many, many, many different things. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the challenges with crypto, and you got to kind of start at the beginning, is that it's very, very complicated. More complicated than any other area of law that I've practiced in. When I think about it, I haven't done patent law. That might be really, really hard too. But what you're looking at is a clip from John Oliver, and some of you may be familiar with his show, Last Week Tonight. In 2018, he did a segment on crypto where he said, quote, "Crypto combines everything you don't understand about money with everything you don't understand about computers." And I knew nothing then. I know very, very little now, enough to be dangerous, as one of my partners says. But it's true, because to understand anything about crypto or Bitcoin or blockchain or all the other things we're going to talk about, you have to understand not just technology. You also have to understand economics. You have to understand the history of money and why societies place value on things to make money. And again, that's just at the base level. And those are things that many of us go through our lives not really thinking about. So I've thought a lot about them, about these issues for the last few years. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into crypto in the first place. So yeah, you don't have to read this. This is my long, stuffy, boring bio. It's available on my website. This makes me look tech savvy. This is a QR code that'll take you to the same place on LinkedIn that I gave you in the chat. I graduated from the University of Miami School of Law in 2012. I went and clerked for a federal judge for a year, and then I went to a litigation boutique in Miami, Florida, and I've been there for the last decade. On day one, my practice was financial frauds and Ponzi scheme litigation. I represented plaintiffs, investors who had been defrauded and, think Bernie Madoff type schemes. And there's plenty of that in South Florida. So that kept me busy for a long, long time. And then in 2018, I was approached with a case. Ultimately, we passed on it, but it was all about Bitcoin. it was actually a dispute between an estate, a man who had passed, who was being represented by his representative, suing another man. And they were essentially claiming that they were founders or had a founding interest in Bitcoin. And the lawsuit was about who should be entitled to a vast fortune of Bitcoin that may or may not even be accessible. But, you know, we're talking about millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. So I didn't take that case, but I followed it over the years, and I dug into it at the time, and I was intrigued. So in the back of my mind, I always had, you know, this concept of crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin in the background. And over the years, as it continued to appreciate and then dropped and then went back up, you know, if nothing else, people know that the crypto market is extraordinarily volatile. In fact, as we speak, if any of you track these things, you know that just like the rest of the stock market, there is a severe drawdown in that entire market. And this is a piece of it that many people that's their only focus. So in any event, in 2010, I got the bug for it. I started to pay attention to it. I started to read about it. And then in 2021, March, COVID, work from home, it really got rekindled for me. A good friend who was very deeply involved with it, and it was part of his practice. And I did a much, much deeper dive. And then I realized at that time that it could fit so naturally into what I was already doing as part of my practice, as part of, you know, doing financial fraud, investment fraud, Ponzi scheme type cases. It was just so obvious to me, and it had already been happening for years, that there was a lot of this going on in the crypto world. So I started to promote it, and then I started to get a lot of calls about it. And a big part of my practice for the last, I would say 18 months or so, has been investigating cryptocurrency related frauds, helping investors with disputes with exchanges or with other folks who, you know, they thought that they engaged in a legitimate investment with, who it turned out it either just didn't pan out because it was a bad deal or because there was fraud involved. In the course of all of this, I realized when I started to hold myself out as a crypto litigator, I realized how much more was involved in it beyond just that limited piece of Ponzi schemes, fraud, and the like. So this is a very oversimplified version of what is the crypto umbrella, what I call the crypto umbrella. These are, at a high level, the different categories of technologies, potential disputes that all could be fairly characterized as crypto disputes or crypto issues. So you have all of the different currencies and tokens like Bitcoin and Ethereum. You may have heard of those two. You've probably heard the term blockchain. That's a form of the technology that's the foundation for all of these things. Smart contracts is another, just a fancy word for a computer code that can make a contract automatic and self-executing, where you don't have to trust your other side to perform. Their performance is done automatically via computer. NFTs, which anybody knows are non-fungible tokens. We'll talk very briefly about that. DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Crypto as a Ponzi, the Metaverse, DeFi, like all of these buzzwords that make this space sound very intimidating, and that there are so many things going on in it, when, you know, in reality, while the technology is complicated, the concepts really are not. So I start with a discussion of blockchain because all of these technologies flow from blockchain technology. And you know, without getting to the details of the tech, I've found that it's easiest for people to understand blockchain is nothing more than a database. We all use databases every day in our work and our practice. I'm a lawyer. I have a database that keeps, all of the relevant documents for all of my cases. A blockchain is a database. It can be public, it can be private, it can be centralized. In other words, it can be controlled by somebody who can go in and manipulate it, or it can be decentralized and what's referred to as immutable, meaning nobody can ever make any changes to it. The things that are attractive about blockchain technology and the things that are publicized about it to promote it are the fact that it can be a system that is 100% secure, foolproof, and when you look at it, you know that there's no chance that it has been tampered or altered, and it can never be tampered or altered. So it's a very, very secure form of a database that for certain purposes can be very, very, very useful. Now, I've given some links or some screenshots here of some articles just to give you an idea of what are some real use cases for blockchain technology that have been discussed or have actually been used. So one, Bloomberg, and I'm from Florida, so I give you a Florida reference. Governor DeSantis at the end of last year, as part of the proposed budget for 2022, talked about a couple of things. He talked about accepting payments in cryptocurrency. Well, that's interesting. But he also talked about allowing blockchain technology to be used for certain public records. So what does that mean? Like vehicle titles, deeds to homes. You could think about court filings. All of these public records that are right now not necessarily very easy to access could be available widely, could be controlled in a secure place, could be accessed immediately. And think about the benefits of having a vehicle title on a blockchain, or better yet, a deed to a home on a blockchain, and not having to do a title search, because you can see instantly every single interaction or every single transaction that's ever happened in connection with that deed. So that's a potential use for blockchain. I think it's a big one, and I think it's inevitable. And that's something that we're talking about in Florida. Here's another article that I referred to where Maersk and IBM partnered to try to use blockchain technology to fix supply chain issues. So they actually created a digital supply chain. They tried it out for a year. And what they found out was using blockchain technology to eliminate middlemen and use smart contracts to make certain transactions automatic at different stages of the chain, they were able to reduce transit time for products by 40%. And you take a simple question of an interested party of saying, where is my product in the chain? Where is it in transit? A simple question like that required 10 different people accessing up to 5 different databases. They were able to reduce that to one person being able to give the answer immediately. Obviously, the cost savings, the time savings, all of that suggests that this is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with and getting familiar with for a very, very long time. Okay, blockchain. That was blockchain. So now we talk about NFTs. Can I just by a show of hands, is anybody familiar with this Beeple NFT that was sold for $70 million at Christie's? Yeah, okay, a few of you, not everybody. So, the concept of NFTs that's getting a lot of press recently is this idea that, this is nothing more than a JPEG, right? It's a computer image, and it was sold for $70 million. It's literally something that you could copy and paste, screenshot, put it on your wall, and you have the exact same thing that the owner of the $70 million NFT has. For a lot of people, that's very controversial. The thing that's interesting to me is that this use for NFTs, just JPEGs that are selling for a whole lot of money, is just one of so many potential uses for them. And some of them also have really interesting potential real world applications. So for example, this piece of the Beeple sale got a lot of the press, but what a lot of people don't talk about is that the code that was associated with the token representing the ownership of the painting. You can think of an NFT as kind of just like a digital certificate of authenticity, right? Like somebody has the certificate of authenticity for the Mona Lisa. The person who owns the NFT for this particular JPEG, it has the certificate of authenticity for that JPEG. Now, the interesting thing about having a digital certificate like that is it can be programmed to do all kinds of cool things. And one of the cool things that this one does is if it's sold to another person, not the person who bought it for $69 million, but if it's sold to another person, it's programmed to automatically give the artist, Beeple, a percentage of that as subsequent sale, and every subsequent sale after that. So then you realize, okay, well, that's interesting. So what that can do for royalties, not just for art, but for music. Think about every time a song is played and the musician gets a fraction of a penny on the deal. Or think about, books, a book being sold, and then if it's resold, textbooks, for example, every time a textbook is resold among students, a percentage of the sale going back to the author of the book.
And Tal, that's through smart contracts. That's what a smart contract is, right?
That's exactly right, Jeff. So a smart contract is not even, it's kind of a misnomer because it's not really a contract in the legal sense. It's just code. It's just a computer program that's being, put in place to do something. And there's a trigger for it. And then once the trigger is triggered, then the counter action happens automatically. So in this case, it would be the NFT being transferred to a new owner. And then as soon as it's transferred to a new owner, money is exchanged, a percentage of that money is going to go directly back to the artist. And, and that just, then you realize that, what you can do with that kind of a technology, you can get really, really creative and you can get really, really interesting. So NFTs are going to have value and stick around for all kinds of reasons separate from this, what I'll call a really, really expensive, probably overpriced images. Okay, now DAOs. DAOs are another fancy word that are getting thrown around a lot. And I said earlier, and you see it on the screen, it stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. That sounds really foreign, but this is a screenshot to the Wyoming Secretary of State website. So why does the Wyoming Secretary of State have a frequently asked questions section on DAOs? Because Wyoming was the first state to enact legislation that officially recognized this form of organization as legitimate. You can go to Wyoming and you can officially form what's called a decentralized autonomous organization, which will be recognized just like an LLC would, or a partnership. The difference is that DAOs account for the reality that you don't necessarily need individuals, you don't need people to be part of the governance or the administration of an organization. You can have intelligence or algorithms, some sort of technology that handles part or all of the governance and the administration. What's promoted as the benefit of having a decentralized organization is, this idea that everybody should have a say. If you're a shareholder in a corporation, you should have a say. And the way that corporations handle governance is there's been all kinds of issues with it over the years, and it mitigates limited ownership or limited interest. And DAOs are kind of a new way to do that. And they're going to be legitimate uses for it, and there are going to be totally disorganized groups of DAOs where people don't know what they're doing, and it's going to lead to all kinds of disputes. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Okay, so I gave what I hope was a very brief overview of just kind of like what the different technologies are that we're talking about. Now let's talk about actually a couple of lawsuits. How do these technologies manifest in actual disputes? And I start with one of the big ones, which is, you see this reference to the SEC lawsuit against a company called Ripple for an unregistered securities offering. And this is the vast majority of the litigation involving cryptocurrency and tokens revolves around this idea of whether something is a security or not, and whether it should have been registered. The SEC is bringing enforcement actions. This is what they did here. There's, by the way, this is not even a fraud case that the SEC has brought. The SEC has sued this company only for not registering a cryptocurrency that in the SEC's view should have been registered because it's a security. Just the fraud associated with it, that is a whole nother bucket of cases, and there are plenty of those as well. And I mentioned, this is an SEC enforcement case, but there's all kinds of private causes of action that are being brought as well. So, the investors who bought these, tokens or coins from this Ripple company, they don't have to wait for the SEC to file a lawsuit. They could sue the company directly and say, you sold me something, it wasn't registered, it should have been registered as a security, and as a result, I've lost money, or whatever the various losses might be associated with that kind of a transaction. So this next case, Kleiman v. Wright. So this is in the Southern District of Florida, and this fun fact, this is the case that was brought to me in 2018 that we did not take. And it was litigated for many, many years. And actually the result, I don't know that controversial is the right word, but it's interesting because the plaintiffs were able to recover a nine-figure, they recovered $100 million, or they secured a judgment for $100 million. They were claiming $50 billion in damages. So there was some interesting back and forth in the media about who actually won the trial. But that case will continue to be litigated in appeals, and whether the plaintiffs will be able to recover money is a whole nother issue. But this was all about a dispute between two guys who claimed that they co-created Bitcoin, and that the one who had access to a lot of money should share in a huge percentage of that with the plaintiff. And disputes like this between individuals or entities who are going to claim co-ownership, co-founding status for a lot of these companies, because of how young the technology is and because of how much money is being devoted to the space, I don't even want to say it's inevitable because it's already started. We're seeing these kinds of disputes all the time. A company gets, started, it's well funded, it makes a tremendous amount of money, it gets a tremendous valuation, and either it goes public or what's called a coin offering, which is like a crypto analog to a IPO, a public offering, and they make a tremendous amount of money, and then there are disputes. And one of the interesting things about the crypto space in general is it is a lot of youth. It is a lot of young entrepreneurs who are very tech savvy, but less organized in the sense of protecting themselves or anticipating issues or disputes. What I've heard other people refer to as having adults in the room. So just like any other industry, it will mature, but that's going to take time. All right, here's some additional examples of cases. This is another lawsuit that was filed in Miami, actually by a firm that I know very well. And this is a class action that was brought against a crypto exchange, right? So if any of you have bought any cryptocurrency, or if you're familiar at all with how do you even get some? If you wanted to buy some Bitcoin, how do you get it? Oh, and let me bracket for a moment that if anybody is interested and wants some Bitcoin, I will send you some. We will do a Zoom. We could do this separately, and I will show you how to download a wallet, and I'll send you, like 25 cents, and you'll see how cool that works. I've done it for a lot of people, and actually, it's interesting. Once people see how easy it is, I think people start to kind of get a different perspective and maybe a little bit of appreciation for why so many people are excited about it. So I stand by that offer, and I'm going to come back to it at the end. But anyway, I have 25 cents of Bitcoin to send to you because I've gotten it from elsewhere. And one example of where you get it is these exchanges. So you go there, you say, here's my dollars. I want X number of Bitcoin or whatever other cryptocurrency, and they give it to you. That while that functions much like your traditional brokerage, like, I go to TD Ameritrade and I want to buy one stock of Apple. So they give me an Apple stock. TD Ameritrade is regulated by the SEC, by SIPC, by all kinds of other regulators. There is little to no regulation in the crypto space. So these exchanges are not regulated. They can advertise all kinds of things. They don't have to have certain levels of liquidity or collateral. People refer to it as the Wild West for a reason sometimes. And so what happens in these situations, it's either call it negligence or fraud or incompetence, but things go bad. And there have been a whole wave of lawsuits by investors or traders who, they bought from an exchange or they transacted on an exchange, and it didn't go the way it was advertised, or there was some technological issue and that caused a problem. And so there are class action lawsuits like these are popping up every other day. And so this is the latest example. You can see here what the claim is. The plaintiff says that the exchange didn't adequately disclose fees that were going to be applied every time they made a trade. These exchanges are making huge margins just off of commissions and fees. And in the normal world, those have to be very well disclosed. In the crypto world, nobody's really looking that hard. So we're gonna continue to see a lot of these cases. Now you see another screenshot here of Hermes lawsuit, and this one is interesting because now we're talking about the disputes that can arise in the world of NFTs. So, is anybody familiar with Hermes and the Birkin bags? Yes. Okay. Most. Hermes found out that some guy in California was selling NFTs, so just JPEGs, pictures on the internet, that he called Meta Birkins, and they were just pictures of the Birkin bags. And Hermes sued and said, you can't do that. That's our intellectual property. And he said, no, it's the First Amendment. It's art, and I can do whatever I want with it. That case is being litigated, and that case is going to create new law about how intellectual property intersects with issues with NFTs. Okay, so we talked about securities and how that's the primary issue. I went a little bit out of order here. I have this reference here only because this is so, by a wide margin, the issue that has so often taken up the space, the crypto litigation space. In other words, the vast majority of the disputes all turn on this issue, whether a particular coin or token is a security. And it's interesting, because you can look at the dates. The Securities Act was enacted in 1933 to determine whether something is a security or not. The Exchange Act was enacted in 1934, which determines whether an exchange is engaging in securities transactions and needs to be registered as a securities exchange. And then the seminal Supreme Court case, SEC versus Howey there, that crafted the test for what is a security is from 1946. And, it's funny because the reason that there needed to be a case is because the statute, the Securities Act itself, it gave guidance over all kinds of things that are securities that are obvious, like stocks, bonds, and all kinds of derivatives. But it also had a catch-all, what's referred to in the statute as what's called an investment contract. So there are hours, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of hours trying to determine whether something, a coin, a token, anything, is a security, because it's unclear whether it is an investment contract or not. That's the gray. And what the court in Howey said was that an investment contract is essentially, do I give you money? Do I anticipate to profit by giving you money? And is my anticipation of profit going to be the result of you and the work that you're doing? It's a pretty straightforward test. And when you look at it that way, you realize immediately that the vast majority of these coins and tokens are securities, or should be securities under that test, because most of the people in this space are trying to make money off of the appreciation of an investment. So the reason why I bring up the Howey test, and I highlighted the dates, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is because it's striking to me and the other people who are dealing with this on a daily basis how difficult it is and how difficult it will continue to be to try to apply these almost century-old laws to a technology that's advancing as rapidly as everything that's blockchain and cryptocurrency related. So I think about this quote all the time, and I always share it when I write or when I speak on these issues. Wilson from Harvard says that the fundamental problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and accelerating godlike technologies. In other words, we have the emotions of cavemen, right? Our institutions, like our judicial institutions, our political institutions, are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they progress glacially. And our technologies change every day. Some of these things become obsolete literally in days. And that presents a very, very, very interesting and substantial challenge for how do you view litigation in a space like this? And I think that the answer is that it's anybody's guess. It's going to progress very slowly. We're going to get guidance from courts across the country. There's going to be splits. It's going to go to appellate courts and Supreme Courts, and those judges are and those courts are not going to be familiar with the technology, and all of this is going to take a lot of time. And the primary takeaway is that uncertainty is going to drive a lot of disputes and a lot of lawsuits, I think, in all of these various branches of crypto and blockchain. Jeff, I've been going longer than I anticipated. I have a little bit more, but I can also cut it short. You tell me, how are we doing on time?
No, we have almost 20 minutes to go, a little longer than that because we started a couple minutes late, Tal.
Okay.
So please, this is fascinating stuff. You have tremendous expertise. Please continue.
All right, perfect. I'll talk, and there'll be some time for questions, I think. All right, so I gave you a brief overview of some representative cases, some specific examples, and I'll just go back over that and highlight some additional types of disputes that we can anticipate. So I talked about the class action, securities, cases. There's just the non-security fraud cases, right? Even if something is not a security, if there's fraud associated with it, you can be sued. And that's my experience. The vast majority of my experience has been fraud cases where the investment was not a security, or we didn't want it to be a security for various strategic reasons. Then there's what I refer to as the DUTBA lawsuits. That's deceptive and unfair trade practices. Every state, I believe every state has one. Some are obviously more consumer friendly than others. Florida has a very pro-plaintiff, consumer friendly DUTBA statute, and we use it a lot. But those exchanges and those actors that aren't currently regulated, they're all going to have exposure to these types of state consumer protection laws. So they're not going to escape that Voyager class action that I told you about. There are claims in there. There are certainly claims in there that it should have been registered and securities fraud, but there are also claims in case it's not a security that what the exchange has done is deceptive and unfair. Talked about enforcement defense. So that's from the regulators, and it's not just the SEC. There's the CFTC, there's the FTC. President Biden had an executive order a couple of months ago that essentially said, I want all of the federal government to communicate, and let's figure out the best way to regulate this developing technology. So it's possible that there's going to be, joint task forces among these agencies. There might be a new agency created. In the next year, probably longer, in terms of enforcement and regulation, we're going to learn a lot about what's going to happen with this. So we talked about DAOs, just being kind of another form of an LLC or a partnership. Well, there are going to be plenty of these disputes among members of DAOs, just like in the traditional shareholder ownership dispute world that many business litigators are familiar with. Founder disputes, like the Wright versus Kleinman case that I talked about in the Southern District of Florida. Companies are going to make a lot of money, and then people are going to have disputes over whose idea it was, who started it, how much money they should be entitled to. We talked about IP, intellectual property disputes over NFTs. That Hermes case is a trademark and copyright case. It's just going to be applied to a new technology. ICO fraud. So I talked briefly about the crypto analog to an IPO, an initial public offering, when a private company goes public. So an ICO is an initial coin offering. And that's what people in crypto world do when they want to raise money. They don't go public. They don't get regulated by the SEC. What they do is they say, we've created a million of our coins, and we're going to sell them for $1 each. Buy as many as you can. And through our work, as we develop the company, 5 years from now, your coin is going to be worth 10 times more than what you purchased it at. And that's how a lot of these crypto startups are getting funding. Now, it's extraordinarily dangerous, right? Probably for some obvious reasons. Literally anybody can take maybe a couple of hours, go on YouTube, figure out how to create some coins and say that they're starting a business and offer these coins for sale, and some people will buy them. So there's rampant fraud in the ICOs. This is cyclical, right? So you see it when the crypto bull market ends, as it did in 2017, 2018. These frauds get uncovered. That's the way it always works in the world of financial fraud. When the economy is good, everybody's making money. Nobody's asking any questions, and nobody wants to pull their money out, right? Because they're getting good returns. As soon as things start to go bad, like, knock on wood, hopefully what's happening now won't last. But, if it does, that's when people start to say, okay, I want my money back. Oh, what? You can't give me my money back? Why not? And then these frauds collapse, And then you start to see the regulators, the criminal cases, and then the private investor lawsuits. And that's what I've been doing in the regular finance world, and that's what I'll be doing in the crypto world. So I have a reference to blockchain hackers. This is, just, I guess, when you're dealing with a complicated technology, there is a lot of human error. So people are, lose money and funds and things because they don't know what they're doing. But there are also bad actors that are very, very savvy, and they know that this is an area that they can exploit because people don't know how to protect themselves. And I get these calls all the time. Somebody had their account hacked, or they had, their cryptocurrency stolen. And, you dig in and, you hope that there's something to be done, but many times there's not, because they gave the wrong person their password, or they didn't, protect themselves, or they fell for like a fraud phone call or something, and they gave information that allowed their account to be compromised. And sometimes there's nothing to be done, but sometimes there is. And there's kind of a whole industry that has developed around forensics in trying to uncover blockchain and crypto related fraud. And we talked about the blockchains being public and readily accessible and viewable. One of the benefits, and one of the things law enforcement has found really, really beneficial, is the fact that there is so much information available to them, and they can do all of this very, very complex analysis on where money moves and between who, that they've actually been able to find bad actors when they never otherwise would have been able to, if it had just been, with cash or typical money laundering, type of money movement that they've been dealing with for years. So then I have the metaverse here with some question marks, because the metaverse is kind of like its whole other separate thing. And it's to me, it's the newest of all of the pieces of this. I don't know what is going to happen with it. I don't know whether it's going to last. For anybody who's not, has like zero familiarity with the concept, it's essentially a virtual world. You put on the glasses and you go into another virtual world. And, there have been movies about this, and, people have been familiar with the concept of, virtual reality for a while. But now the metaverse is being promoted as, well, things can have value in this other virtual world. You could buy real estate in this virtual world. You could buy, your property. You could have a business and you could operate it in the virtual world. So whether that's going to last, or whether that's going to create some whole new, legal framework that's going to have to be designed to deal with those kinds of disputes, I have no idea. I think it's much too soon to say. But it's interesting. And if 2021 was the year of the NFTs, 2022 will probably be the year of the metaverse. I think you have to note that one of the interesting things about crypto, and one of the things that makes litigation extra complicated in the space, is how international it is. So you have, a lot of this work is being done, and a lot of these companies are being formed overseas, in the Bahamas, in Asia, so we're all familiar with, or if you litigate, you're familiar with jurisdictional issues, but in the crypto world, it's almost like every case has a very, very significant jurisdictional issue. The answer is never, I've been wronged and I'm in Florida and the other person is in California, let's sue in federal court. It is never that simple. So whether some new framework is going to have to be created to deal with the jurisdictional issues that are going to be unique to crypto is something else that's going to be interesting to monitor. And so here I give this reference to this article where there was a recognition, I think, of the challenges, and one court in New York just a couple months ago allowed somebody to serve an entity through alternative service. I actually think that the alternative service was a direct message on Twitter. They were able to serve an international defendant by messaging the complaint through Twitter to them. And they got a motion, they filed a motion and had a federal court judge allow them to do that. And here is just from about a year ago, a law review article that is specifically just about this and did a pretty good job of providing an overview of all of the jurisdictional challenges that are going to be involved with this. We've already talked about Wilson, and I'll end with, if I was a dispute, if I was in dispute resolution, if I was thinking about what's the value, what could I do, what's the value that I could add to lawyers that are working in this space, I think step one is just a recognition of how many tentacles there are to this and how many moving pieces there are. So, for example, I don't, when people ask me now, what do you do, crypto litigation, I'm fully aware of the fact that there are pieces of this universe that I know very little about, and I have to be, transparent about that. Now, one of the benefits that I offer is, if nothing else, I have a pretty deep understanding of the language, right? And in many of these disputes, it may be that it's a traditional business dispute, something with a DAO dispute among shareholders or something. But you're still going to need a translator. And so the value of having some understanding of the technology, of the terminology, I think will be tremendous. And I think knowing enough to know that there are all these different pieces to it, and it's not going to be your whole practice, but if you pick one or two, I think there could be tremendous value in that. So for me, for example, my best value will always be for those who have been victims of a fraud. And obviously there will be plenty of that. Now, will I handle intellectual property disputes related to NFTs or some dispute between members of a DAO? Yes, and I understand that space and I understand the technology, but I'm gonna have to learn more. And so, if nothing else, take that away as you think about these types of cases, and if you're approached for any of these types of cases. Now, I promised that I would send Bitcoin, so I will say that if you're interested in that, just connect with me. I put my contact information in the chat. I'm happy to speak to any of you about these issues, this technology. I love it. I love that it's become a part of my practice, and I like to see other people, even if they're not going to become real deeply interested in it, I like to see people get at least an appreciation of how a transaction works. And other than that, I really, really thank you all for the time. I had a great time preparing, and if you have any questions, please, I'd love to talk about it.
Al, that was just terrific, comprehensive and insightful. Thank you so much. Let me just ask the first question. If people want to know more and learn more, is there a particular bar association or a particular professional organization that people ought to join and whose newsletter we ought to read?
That's a great question, and that's something I've been talking about with a lot of people. There's a lot of interest in developing one of these. There's nothing that I would feel comfortable recommending. In terms of resources and materials, again, if you want to keep up with the times, social media is definitely the best resource because of how fast-paced everything is. Now, that's a pain, and I get that. So, I'm on Twitter not because I, necessarily want to be, but because I have to be to keep up. But, there are a lot of really, really great resources, podcasts, newsletters that I receive. And, I'm happy, Jeff, to give you, and maybe you can share with the attendees after. I can give you like some recommendations about
Sure.
some resources. And also I'll start with, foundational. There is a book that I recommend for anybody who is interested in learning more that's very accessible. It's called The Internet of Money. It's in 3 volumes. They're all very, very short and easy to read. And by what a lot of people consider to be the godfather of Bitcoin. And he explains the technology very, very well. And that's what I read first that really, really triggered me doing a much deeper dive into this.
Thanks. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. If anybody has a question, please just unmute yourself and ask.
That's the one, Natalie. Thank you. And she just put a link to that book in the chat.
Right.
Thank you so much, Tal. This has been fantastic. I know people getting into this, of course, but your background made it sound so normalized and every day in a positive way. So thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
and I'm confident that Camillus House, Natalie, I believe you posted the contact information, the link again in the chat. I'm confident that Camillus House will benefit greatly from your presentation today. I know people who are in a position where they're able to contribute will contribute. We thank you for a wonderful presentation, Tal. On behalf of the Will Work for Food Project team, deep appreciation. And with that, we are complete.